1998's Resident Evil 2 might be the best horror game ever made. It's easily the best survival horror game ever made. The only game that can rival it is itself. That is to say, its 2018 remake. Both strike the perfect balance between exhilarating set pieces and creeping tense horror. And that brings us to the Resident Evil 3 remake, which very much struggles with that balance.
It's my turn, bitch!
Even back in 1999, when the original Resident Evil 3 came out, fans seemed divided on the new action-orientated gameplay. It still retained a lot of the same DNA that made Resi 2 such a masterpiece, but it was pretty clear that Capcom wanted to shift the series' focus in a more bombastic direction, which had mixed results. The reason I'm bringing up this specific issue with Games Past is because the exact same thing happened again.
Oh no, not again.
Resident Evil 3 Remake released with a much greater focus on action over survival horror, and just like its older sister, fans were divided. Now I know you've read the title, and by now you're probably assuming that I'm going to defend Resi 3's more explosive approach, and to a certain degree, I am.
Ballsy motherfucker.
Don't get me wrong, I really do wish Capcom had stuck with the more slow-paced, atmospheric style that Resi 2 had. I've said it before, and I'll never stop saying it. Resident Evil 2 Remake is hands down the best remake ever, and it may well be one of the best games ever. It's easily in the top 20 for me. But just because I wish Resident Evil 3 Remake could be more like its predecessor, doesn't make it bad by default. I have my gripes with the game, mainly that Nemesis is nowhere near as intimidating as Mr. X, which, considering Nemesis is an icon of the franchise, really shouldn't be the case. The biggest letdown for me going into Resi 3 was that, unlike Mr. X, Nemesis doesn't stalk you around the map constantly, instead just turning up at certain sections for a chase sequence before randomly disappearing again. It seems like the perfect opportunity was just sitting in front of the devs, and they looked right by it. That said though, Nemesis is still as absolutely terrifying as he was back in '99. The chases may be scripted, but that doesn't change the fact that they're excellently choreographed. And on the occasions Jill gets attacked in a more open area, the freedom in direction you're given makes for some really tense moments. And those moments are made by the fact that you spend a decent amount of time in that area beforehand. So when Nemesis does turn up, you've learned the layout and it's up to you to decide the best escape route. And when Nemi eventually foils your plan, you have to use your knowledge of the area to panic decide your next method of escape. It's a very simple concept that Resi 3 100% nails. Just like in the original, between Jill's escapades with Nemesis, you get to play as Umbrella Soldier Carlos. These bits are particularly interesting because they're the closest the game comes to that creeping horror tension that OG Resis are known for. But he's also got an assault rifle, so they're kind of the most action-packed as well. The two locations you play Carlos through are the hospital, which might be the tightest designed section of the game, except for the other location, which is the same police station the majority of Resident Evil 2 takes place in. It'd be pretty easy to just call Resi 3 lazy for picking up and plonking the same map into another game, and maybe it is, but it'd be an outright lie to even suggest that I didn't love this part of the game. Because 3 is set a few hours before the events of 2, we get to see how certain memorable moments played out, and even how some of the obstacles Leon and Claire have to work around came to be. It's obviously done much better in Resident Evil 2, However, that doesn't mean it's not fantastic to experience the RPD headquarters again here. And as a fun bonus as well, if you remember the codes to some of the lockers, they'll work here too, which is a fucking really cool way to reward players that have been paying attention. I will admit, the latter half of the game does devolve into being somewhat cliched and generic. But if you've ever played a Resident Evil game, you should have known that going in. Even the best Resi games have better beginnings than endings. If Resident Evil 3 does anything right, it's the way it brings Raccoon City to life. Most zombie films and games don't often use cities as locations, because they'll either take way too long to create or be too much of a pain to film in. And yeah, the city sections in Resi 3 are brief, but that alone gives it an edge over most other games in the subgenre. A lot of this video was pretty much just me saying it was better in Resident Evil 2, but it's still good here, and that really sums up the situation. Yeah, compared to Resi 2, this is a bit of a letdown. Nemesis can't hold a tentacle to Mr. X, the action focus rips a lot of the tension right out, and in doing so, makes the overall length of the game much shorter. But when you take into account what I said earlier, you know, the part about Resi 2 Remake potentially being one of the best games ever, it's not any surprise that Resi 3 disappointed some people. If anything, I commend Capcom for not just changing Resi 3 into Resi 2, because that's never what the original Resident Evil 3 was about. It was always supposed to be a more explosive, action-focused version of Resident Evil 2, and that's what it was. Sure, I, and many others, would have likely preferred a sequel that matches the tone set by the first couple of Resident Evil remakes, but we set ourselves up for disappointment by expecting Resident Evil 3 to be anything else than Resident Evil 3. Thanks for watching the video, guys. Do you prefer Resi 2 or Resi 3? Do you prefer the remakes or the originals? Pretty much anything Resi related that you can think of, let us know about it down in the comments, because we'd love to talk about it. And if you do have the time to leave a like, or if you even want to subscribe, we would really, really appreciate that. Cheers.